Quebec's politicians fight for Quebec. And Quebec knew back in 1966 they did their own, and they've pretty much remained sovereign in and of themselves. They're still a part of Canada, and that's what Alberta needs to do, is instead of being so angry, I think, with Quebec, we need to actually use them as the model to replicate here right in Alberta and do that ourselves. So if they can do it, we can, in my opinion, we can do it better.
Well, I'm Soos here for Rebel News. Very happy to be joined by Nadine Wellwood. She is a chartered investment manager, and you may also recognize her as a former UCP and Alberta Senate candidate. She is touring the province effectively on sort of a fact-sharing mission to espouse some of the values of the possibility of Alberta basically bringing on its own pension and leaving the Canadian pension.
The LifeWorks analysis estimates that Albertans could save more than $5 billion in the first year alone if we moved from the CPP to an Alberta pension plan. That's because hardworking Albertans have paid much more into the CPP than Alberta's seniors get back in pension benefits. What does $5 billion in savings mean for Albertans? Well, there are a few potential scenarios. $5 billion could mean more money for seniors, who could see larger monthly pension benefits. Seniors might even receive a $5,000 to $10,000 bonus payment when they retire, if that's how Albertans want to design the pension. There's more money for their household at a critical time. $5 billion could mean larger paychecks for employees. If we put the entire amount towards reducing premiums, Alberta's workers would pay $1,425 less in annual premiums to an Alberta pension plan than they do right now in CPP premiums. Even a portion of that would be a major affordability boost for families struggling to buy groceries and pay for our other priorities. And because employers match the CPP premiums their employees pay, it would also mean savings for our businesses and less of their earnings being sent to Ottawa. That's annual savings of $1,425 per year per worker could be invested back in the company or used to hire more workers, strengthening the Alberta advantage. Another important benefit of an Alberta pension plan is it would be more stable than the current federal plan. With a potential transfer of over $300 billion in assets from the CPP, an Alberta pension plan would be able to deliver benefits over the long term at a lower cost than the CPP. This is possible because Alberta's younger demographic and strong labour force. According to the analysis, an Alberta pension plan would have a much bigger pool of assets compared to its number of retirees, and that means great pension security for Albertans.
Is Alberta paying more into the Canadian pension than they're going to get out of it ultimately?
Well, I hope the questions get tougher than that, because that's a really easy answer. Yes. Alberta is one of the few net contributors, and in the last 6 years alone, to the tune of about $20 billion, disproportionately more from Alberta than the other provinces.
Now, should Alberta decide to leave, are they legally entitled to sort of recouping those massive investments that they've made into the Canadian pension? That's
a really good question, because a lot of people have been advertising the fact that $334 billion, as the LifeWorks report stated, was an absurd number. Well, if you actually look at the Canada Pension Plan Act itself, it's very clear as to what the formula is and how they came to that number. But more importantly, people have been questioning the intention behind it. But if you look at John Robarts, who was the Ontario Premier at the time when the Canada Pension Plan was established, it was made very clear by him that should Ontario at any time in the future wish to leave, it would be precisely financial position that had they set up their own pension plan from the onset. So I think the LifeWorks analysis of what they did was a very accurate and certainly a very fair starting point.
Now, the Liberal government in Canada, not known for giving Alberta sort of a fair deal, their fair shake. Do you suspect that if this is a decision that this government were to make, the Alberta government, that the Liberal government in Canada would respect it, or would it become a massive sort of conundrum to actually enact this?
I think they have to respect the decision to leave. I think where we'll end up into some shenanigans will be I think the number will be debated, and I think that will eventually have to go to court.
Right.
But I mean, you've seen numbers that Trevor Thomas even mentioned, 120, 150 billion. What I've been trying to educate people here is, in reality, Alberta does not need anything from the federal government and from the CPP assets in order to start this pension plan.
Right.
And if you look at it as a true pension plan, Alberta is in a far better situation to actually go it on its own.
So even if they don't get anything back from what they've invested, which you'd hope you would, but it would still be beneficial?
Absolutely. But the point is we are going to get something. So I would argue that at a minimum, we're looking at that $120 to $150 billion.
Yeah.
And if we get that in 30 years invested at 6% per year with our small population that we have to support, you're looking at probably, $926 billion in an asset. That's far better than anything that you're able to do right now under the Canada Pension Plan. So what I do tonight is I actually break things down for people, and I show them the numbers. So if we take unfunded liabilities, for example, out of the picture, and we just look at assets, the Canada Pension Plan has $590 billion in assets, but it has to service 22 million Canadians. That's $28,818 per member, per Canadian that's contributed. If we take a look at the fact that Alberta is only having to pay to service the 2.25, 2.25, Albertans, if we look at that 30 years out from now, we would be looking at $412,000 per member. So that's a far greater financial secure position, and of course it offers more security not only to the individual, but the problem with the Canada Pension Plan is it's a government-owned asset. Right. So
touched on a lot there. I guess because you mentioned the 6% investment, the one question that I have for you, the government doesn't do very well, to be perfectly honest, federally. Provincially as well, I think most of us would be inclined towards less government. But the Canadian Pension Plan sort of annually over the last decade, annualized, has done about 10.9%. That's actually quite good compared to other investments internationally. So how do we know we could do better, or even if we don't do better, we're better off, is what you're saying?
So the rate of return is only one tool that you want to use in analyzing the risk as it relates to the Canada Pension Plan. Nobody is disputing that, and it's actually 9.3% over the 10-year annualized rate of return for the Canada Pension Plan investments. And of course, that was at 10, it went to 9.6, now it's at 9.3. It is dropping. And investing in the last couple of years hasn't been as strong as in previous years. So investments are going to ebb and flow, but you have to look at all the risks. And the biggest risks to any pension plan are unfunded liabilities, and that has a lot to do with the economy, demographics, and immigration.
Right. So then I suppose the big question, the CPC as it currently exists, is it sustainable? If Alberta drops out, is it sustainable? Like, I know there's a lot of prognosis about the amount of funds going in are nowhere near what is coming out now with age of retirement going down and a number of sort of demographic shifts. But is it sustainable ultimately?
So the chief actuarial report has said that it's sustainable for 75 years, but there is some very big assumptions made around the rates of returns, around the demographics, around the economy. The Canadian economy is right now going to be one of the worst economies of any of the OECD countries for the next, to 2060. That doesn't bode well. We're already seeing it in the news today, actually, very severe warnings coming from the Bank of Canada and from other sources about the inability of Canada to actually increase its productivity. And I think most of that comes down to just bad economic policy. And the reality is that's a huge risk factor to any pension.
Since the CPP was founded nearly 60 years ago, no province has ever left. This action is unprecedented. It would be very complicated, and it would come at a time of great uncertainty and complexity. Protecting the pensions of every single Canadian is a priority for our government. We will always stand up for the Canada Pension Plan and for the secure and dignified retirement it provides to all Canadians, a point I made clear in today's meeting.
And then if you look at demographics, I mean, Alberta just has the younger demographic. We have, we work more, we have the higher income. So one of the things I like to share with people is the fact that, the enhanced CPP, which came out, now only applies to those people in that $68,000 to $73,200 kind of tax bracket.
Right.
Next year, that goes up to $78,000. Well, we are already the highest contributors. Why? Because we have some of the highest incomes.
Right.
That inadvertently, and I would say probably the federal government was very well aware that disproportionately punishes Albertans yet again. So if you consider that $3 to $5 billion extra each and every year to a Canada Pension Plan, that's an equalization payment.
Right. Yeah. That's pretty well. I suppose my other question for you, we've seen sort of some localized government investments in pipelines and things like that go awry. Is there a risk that the investments become a bit myopic and the Alberta government is perhaps investing in Alberta industries that may not necessarily pan out, and as a consequence there's some losses? Or is that sort of, would you have a standard investment firm ensuring that those things don't happen? How do you sort of balance that?
Well, I think the key is to make sure that you have a very diversified portfolio, and that's going to be on the public side as well as the private side, not unlike what the Canada Pension Plan has been doing. Nobody's going to dispute their asset allocation and what they've done, and it needs to be global. I've had a lot of people challenge me on, well, we're investing a lot in China, we're investing a lot in other countries, but the problem is, and we're seeing this again in the news even recently, Canada right now is not a favorable place to invest. And so that's the question people need to be asking, is why isn't Canada a favorable place to invest? And we have investors that want to invest anywhere else but Canada right now.
There's lots of rhetoric. Let's talk about the sort of the backlash and the response from the people who are very opposed to this, implying that Danielle Smith is stealing people's pensions. I think that logic assumes that Justin Trudeau is currently holding their pensions hostage, I guess. Does this come down to who do you trust more, Danielle Smith or Justin Trudeau ultimately?
I think there is a leap of faith that has to occur. So financially, economically, all of this makes sense. And the lack of trust has been a fundamental concern of everybody I speak with. And it is going to have to come down to, we have more, I think, influence over a provincial leader than we do over a federal leader.
Right.
And it is going to come down to a little bit of a leap of faith and going, who do you trust more? Maybe we should rephrase that. Who do you trust least?
Yeah.
And take a look at who do you have a greater ability to influence in the future. And I think that really boils down to provincial. And I think it's really important for people to understand too that once we do this, it's not just about it's vote and then done. We need to make sure that we put the public pressure on our politicians to ensure the best interests, our best interests. So people need to get involved and stay involved.
Final question for you. Why is it that Albertans have to fight so hard to get things that places like Quebec just get automatically without question?
Quebec's politicians fight for Quebec. And Quebec knew back in 1966 they did their own, and they've pretty much remained sovereign in and of themselves. They're still a part of Canada, and that's what Alberta needs to do, is instead of being so angry, I think, with Quebec, we need to actually use them as the model to replicate here right in Alberta and do that ourselves. So if they can do it, we can, in my opinion, we can do it better.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's Nadine Wellwood. Really appreciate your insight on this. And always, I want to thank everyone at home for tuning in. For Rebel News, I'm Adam Soos. Well, the Canadian Pension Plan isn't the only way that the federal government is squeezing Albertans' wallets. As you know, they're also set to bring in an increase to the carbon tax that will certainly punish not just Albertans, but people right across this country. If you agree that the carbon tax needs to be axed, sign our petition at stopthecarbontax.com.